All right. It is my pleasure to have Ariane joining us as we just have a nice discussion, a chat a little bit about mentorship. So Ariane, thank you so much for joining
Thank
me.
you so much for having me. Hi, everyone.
Do you want to just start by just sharing a little bit about yourself and maybe your journey as an educator into where you are right now?
Sure. My name is Ariane Hamner. I'm currently employed as a special ed preschool teacher. I teach a class for students who are impacted by their disabilities mildly to moderately. I started in this field as a paraprofessional, and I also worked and I did ABA therapy, which is in home services, focusing on learning behavior and social skills, or adjusting and correcting behavior and supporting behavior and social skills.
That's great. That's awesome. Can you tell me, so what we wanted to kind of focus on today in our discussion is just kind of the role of mentorship. So if you think about mentorship just generally, can you share a little bit about the role of mentorship and getting you to where you are right now in your career?
Sure. So this is my fourth year of teaching. I've taught 3 years preschool. This is my third year teaching preschool. And then prior to that, I taught an SDC class for students kindergarten to third grade. So mentorship was really important in my experience and still is thus far. I started teaching prior to entering the credential program. So it was imperative to have a mentor and someone to show me how to be a teacher before I had the formal training. And I found it to be really, really helpful, sometimes more impactful, at least more practical than coupling the theory and pedagogy with my practice thus far. And I'm still learning how to integrate my formal knowledge with kind of the day-to-day functions of the job. So having a mentor was really important in that process. Like first off, structuring the physical environment. I didn't know how to set up a classroom going into teaching. And so that was really important, especially for students with varying abilities and needing different social supports. Visual supports and behavior supports, and how to encourage communication through PECs and other alternative modes of communication. All of this I learned through mentorship prior to entering the program. So
That's
mentorship is very important.
It is. I like what you're talking about in terms of like mentorship as like a really important way of gaining knowledge and experience, right? So like, and you're right. I feel like sometimes the role of mentor, if they're right there or in the field with you, then the knowledge or example that they can show
Mhm.
is so applicable. Where if you're in a class or if you're reading and so forth, it's important, but it's not always 100% relatable to what you're doing in the field too, right?
And sometimes I needed answers quicker than a class would address a topic. So if I'm dealing with a behavior now, like I need to know how to support this child and this behavior like quickly versus
Yeah.
you go through the entire semester and then you may reach that topic or you may not. So it's really helpful to have someone, especially if they're on site with you and you can just, walk a few steps and ask that question. That's really important. It was very helpful for me as a new teacher and still is actually. I still
Yeah, for sure. So when you think about your experience with mentors, does like a specific person or people come to mind that have just played a really important role as a mentor for you?
Yes, during my first year of teaching, I taught alongside a really strong SPED team, special ed team. So I think one of the most important things you can have as far as support on campus would be a strong SPED team, multiple SDC classes on one site so that you can collaborate, so that you can meet, exchange ideas, and sometimes even just vent when days are tough and you have that community around you. And so I did have one mentor specifically who was very impactful and actually went through San Francisco State to get her teaching credential as well and referred me to the program here. So I was able to go to her classroom and ask her questions. I kind of mimicked her themes and how she set up her classroom. I would borrow curriculum and different things like that. So yes, this specific mentor was very impactful in my experience. I wish I kept in touch with her to this day because I would say thank you for everything because she was really, really helpful in my experience. And so I still like implement some of the strategies I learned from her in her classroom.
I like that. And I feel like that's such good advice. Like, even when you are considering a job or considering like a position, the importance of like having a support system.
Mhm.
And like, I mean, and there are a lot of settings where the preschool is like standalone or all by itself.
Mhm.
So it does feel important to kind of figure out like who are you going to be able to work with and collaborate with? Are there people that you're going to be able to meet with? And because as you're saying, like, how helpful would that be? And I'm guessing it wasn't just helpful for you. I'm guessing that whole team to have people to be able to like bounce ideas off and just for morale and like support, it feels so important.
It is very important. I went from a larger school district with a SPED team and kind of that strong sense of collaboration to being a standalone class. We're the only SDC class on my campus currently, and preschool as well. So we have that age difference as far as grade level difference, and we're that specialty. We're the special day class on campus. So I don't have that mentor or teacher to collaborate with on my site. At least I do have one district wide, but not on my site. So it makes a difference. You do feel isolated and you kind of miss that person to bounce ideas off of, to ask questions, because even in my fourth year, I'm still learning. I still have a lot to learn. I still encounter situations where I'm like, what would a veteran teacher do? Like, and I don't have that person to ask, or at least not as quickly and readily available. So it makes a really big difference.
Yeah, that's a good point. So if you don't have that on your, don't have that readily available to like actively seek it out. It sounds like you have maybe somebody in the district, but then it makes me think about how informal support or mentorship might become important to seek out because you're right. Because otherwise it can feel kind of lonely and isolating.
Mhm. You're left scheduling meetings instead of just walking into someone's classroom. Hey, quick question. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
I'm going to schedule a meeting to ask my questions. And, it can be a little inconvenient in terms of like time wise. Like you don't want to take up that person's time and, vice versa.
sure. Yeah, I can see that for sure. Yeah, it just speaks to like the importance of mentorship. Hey, to have, and if you can get that relationship where you can just bounce off ideas and it can be informal and that you're right. Like, I think there's probably a time and place for like formal meetings, but it's also pretty nice to have somebody to be like, oh man, this kid is just having like a really tough day. Like, what, any ideas or like, what should I do? Um, so now when I think about like as you're in your fourth year and continuing to move forward, have you had opportunities yourself to be a mentor or and what has that looked like?
So mentorship for me right now in this role, I think about my paraprofessionals and supporting them to support the class. A
Mhm.
lot of paraprofessionals or some paraprofessionals can come into your class and they may not have a lot of experience in the field. And so in that case, I take the time to train them and offer information, give them support and resources. I'd like to kind of explain and provide context as to why we're doing certain things that we do, whether it's using visual supports or any kind of support or modification, and sort of explain like the reasoning behind it, because some things could seem a little um, trying to think of the correct wording. It may not make sense if you don't have the background in education, and for some paraprofessional roles you don't need that education. And so I think it's important that they know why they're doing what they're doing. And I think it also helps train them so that, if they want to go into the field, they know or have that support behind them. So I think that's really important. So in this role, the most mentorship that I do right now is training paraprofessionals and providing support when needed.
Yeah, that's great. I know I didn't say this question when we were preparing, but when you think about characteristics of a good mentor, that in your experience or what you're trying to emulate to your paraprofessional team, what kind of characteristics kind of come to mind as like something that things that are really important to have as a good mentor?
I think relationship is most important. I think our job isn't just professional. Like we are personal, we have a good time because you're going to have tough days. Like we work a very, hard job. It's challenging at times. So I think having that relationship with your staff, so that they feel comfortable in talking to you and you going to them, and not feeling like you are the supervisor of the room or the leader of the room. Like it's very collaborative work. And so I want them to feel like I value their voices and opinions and feedback, which I actually do, because it's helpful. You can learn from, anyone. They may have experience that I don't have. So I think having that relationship is one of the key characteristics of a mentor mentee.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. When you think about working with mentors, maybe both informal or formal, what have you had to do as a mentee to kind of prepare yourself for getting feedback and hopefully it's constructive feedback? But like, so if they are saying like, oh, why are you doing this? Or try something else, like what have you had to do to kind of prepare yourself as a mentee to be able to accept that kind of feedback?
So accepting feedback. I'm still working on this area of accepting feedback. Some of the challenges I've run into in shaping how I accept feedback, and more so specifically who I'm accepting feedback from, I've had to open my mind to looking at things from different angles in terms of like from different areas, different disciplines. So for example, if the speech and language pathologist has some input and she's coming from, a different perspective, or she has that specialized knowledge, just being receptive to that information. Another example, working with like the behaviorist of the school district who specifically looks at behavior. I may think, okay, this intervention may not be practical, or whatever tips and things like that. I have to get out of the mindset of um, kind of looking at things with biases and barriers, and being open and receptive to accepting feedback and input from other specialists or supervisors. In my experience, I haven't had to accept too much input from the principals. The principals I've worked under have been more, I guess, laissez-faire, to say it in one way. And I think it is because we are, a special class, and they may not have that knowledge to provide that feedback. So I've gotten reviews in terms of like teacher reviews and observations and things, and they've been very friendly. So accepting that kind of feedback is fairly simple, but I'm always open to implementing things and suggestions and practices that other people suggest. But it's taken time just getting out of the mindset of I'm looking at it from just a barrier. Why can't I do that? Instead of like, okay, I can try it. We'll try it. We'll come back to the drawing board and see if it didn't work. Why didn't it work? And kind of look at things with an open mind. So I've had to open my own mind.
Yeah, that's such a good. It makes me think a lot about what you said about the importance of relationships, because it feels easier to take feedback from somebody that you have a relationship with and that you trust, right? So that you're like, oh, they're not saying this to like have a power play move against me, or to, I don't know, or to be unkind or mean. Like they're not doing it to just be mean or a jerk to me. Rather, they are like they're saying things maybe based on their experience. But it makes me just think about how important it is to have that relationship, because then you'll trust what they say too, right? Like so, and then it's easier to take feedback from somebody that you're like, oh, they have the best interest, or they really want to help me, I'm guessing.
That's a great point. I agree with that. I feel like I work best and collaborate best with specialists who make the point to have a relationship outside of just giving feedback and suggestions. Like maybe we talk personally, or they spend some time in the classroom outside of like direct service and just get to know the kids. And so we're actually, forming that bond and having that collaboration time outside of just I'm observing, here's what you can do better. Because that it feels very like, oh, I'm attacked. So I'm trying to get out of that mindset and be more receptive, and as you mentioned, build that relationship.
Just a good point though too, because if you are a mentor or if you're a mentee, like making space so that like it's not just about getting feedback all the time too. You're right. Like a part of that relationship is like that you're also take time to like shoot the breeze, and that you're talking about what's going really well and planning together. So I like that idea of like to have that mentee mentor relationship. It's not all about the mentor always like telling you what to do, or giving you feedback too. That's key.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you think about moving forward in your career in early childhood special education, where do you see yourself going into, and what role do you think mentorship will play in that?
So long term, I would love to see myself, or I do see myself in an admin role. I'm specifically a director of special education. And so to do that, I will need a lot of mentorship in learning and remembering the laws and the special ed practices as they relate to like IEPs, and where we go from just the IEP. Like maybe it's a contentious IEP, how to navigate that, and just working with families overall and just improving my practice. And so to do that, I'd love to have a relationship with a program specialist, which they typically oversee our programs. Currently at the district I'm at, we don't have one. So I think that's another key in looking at jobs and districts, to see that there is that person in between like yourself and maybe the director, or there's that chain of command to support you as a teacher. And so for me, I would love to have that mentorship at my level so that I'm learning and growing in my practice. And one day I can achieve my goal of getting into an admin position.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks for sharing about that. When you think about yourself as like a brand new teacher, like 4 years ago, what do you wish, or even before when you were working in ABA, What do you wish you knew about mentorship, or what would you want to share with people that are just starting out in the field?
I would say just come into work with an open mind. Also, don't back down from the challenges. You are going to encounter challenges and be receptive to taking in that information because it more than likely is useful and will make your day easier. And then it kind of trickles down. You get that information, you apply it, and your day is easier. Children are making progress, they're happy, they're excited to go to school, families trust you, and it just informs your practice so much more, having that information and support from a mentor. So just being open-minded to accepting information and support.
Super important. I like that. And just the open-mindedness of different approaches, different ways. I think that's great. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you wanted to mention, Ariane?
I would just say that I emphasize mentorship, especially if you were teaching or did teach before you started the program. I think you can learn a lot from the people who have done this. I call them the veteran teachers, teachers who've been teaching for, a few years or more, and they have that information. And chances are they've been through the experiences that are challenging you. So I would reach out to the people that you have around you and use those use those teachers as tools and information and get all of the information that you can because you will need it.
I think that's great advice. Thank you, Ariane. I so appreciate you coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.